Good morning. So we have arrived, and so the secret's out the bag. We are at the Microsoft head office. The Microsoft head office here in Johannesburg, and we're at the blockchain conference. We're at the Blockchain Africa conference. Excited. Hope we're going to learn a lot of stuff. I still wanted to get one of those in Germany, but instead of getting the DeX, I actually got myself an iPad. So yeah, kind of ditched the Microsoft and PC. But yeah, Microsoft seems like it's a pretty legit place, man. It's a hell of a lot of stuff going on here. So quite excited. A lot of people arriving. We're supposed to kick off at about 9, I think. So let's see what happens.
Some very interesting people here. We just heard from Michael, but we've got some great minds doing very interesting things in the space. We've got Adrian over here, who is the head of strategy at Ripple. Is that no? Sorry, let me just take your thing here. Chief Standards Officer. Okay.
Less chief, more standards.
Yes, of course. And then we've got Marvin, founder of Raise, and Michael Glaros, we've heard from Microsoft. And John Shipman, Global Head of Cryptocurrencies and Digital Asset Services of, what is your company?
PwC.
PwC, of course. Okay, so...
startup.
Is it a startup?
Yeah, and a bad one.
Right, so I think, you know, one of the most sort of glaring things in this space, if you've been in this space for a while or you've just joined it, you're going to notice that there's very much two sides to all this that's been going on. I mean, we've been looking at all this infrastructure, we've been looking at all these tools and services, we've been looking at all these protocols. There's just so much going on in the space. But in my mind, there's definitely two major categories of all this stuff. There's what we call the decentralized cryptocurrencies, like Bitcoin, and then everything else. You know, the technologies like Ripple and that everybody has been working with. And so, I mean, that's obviously a broad category. So what I just wanted to know from you all, this is a general question, is do you see a future for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin where there is no governing entity like a reserve bank or something, or a company? Do you think that the future can tolerate a decentralized form of money that's not issued by a central bank? Or do you think that the only future for blockchain and these protocols is for private and permission type technologies?
Yep. So absolutely, there is absolutely a future for decentralized currencies. I really liked the way Elizabeth described them earlier as complementary currencies, and I think that's fundamentally that's the vision at Ripple, that complementary currencies, counterparty-less currencies that move frictionlessly because of the technology on which they exist are key to solving the problem that we're solving, the cross-border payments problem. So you talked about, you know, two sides. We have XRP Ledger, we have XRP the currency, and then you have a company, Ripple, that's building solutions on top of that. Now, XRP is open source software. The currency, you know, anyone can hold an XRP account and send out XRP to anyone, and that's fundamentally what underpins our cross-border payments liquidity solution, is that you buy XRP on demand, you send it somewhere, and you sell it on demand, and you get all of that in a few seconds. So, you know, Elizabeth's business is evidence of the use case, and I think that's just going to go from strength to strength.
Are we going to go down the line? I'm not sure if these are working, are they? Might just hold up.
You may have to touch the president button.
Yeah, so literally just came from the Reserve Bank, who govern things like money, apparently. Of course there's a future, yeah, no doubt about it. I think most people in the room would probably say the same thing. What's highly fascinating for us and pertinent from a PwC perspective is how we help central banks around the world to not only navigate through, you know, crypto of a Bitcoin nature and understand what that means and regulate that in the way that we want it to be regulated, but also to understand how they're going to be minting in their own digital currencies, how that's going to evolve, how they evolve alongside Bitcoin and other more traditional crypto, and even more than that, what about tokens that represent assets on any level, and how does the central bank govern that, and how does the world sort of really interact with those platforms? So yeah, it's going to be around.
I would agree that, certainly the future is there. There's just so much human innovation going on around the world. I think the more interesting question is what becomes of that innovation. So especially when you look at cryptocurrencies tend to be overloaded from the standpoint of the actual value exchange, investment, payments, but also things like the engines that power the smart contract execution themselves. It just feels like there's some inevitable innovation to really better compartmentalize and manage those things, so that if I want to execute smart contracts, I'm not necessarily beholden to the volatility of the value of those instruments, which then could potentially give me pause about the type of functionality I want to build into those smart contracts.
I hate to disagree, because we've all disagreed, but absolutely, you'll see very soon a lot of different governments release digital dollars, which will be built with cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. And the reality is those dollars will exist, and in a lot of ways won't be as private as people want them to be, so a lot of people will start flocking in the next couple of years to cryptocurrencies that provide some kind of privacy. So these cryptocurrencies are going to continue to be, like was said earlier, complementary currencies, things that we use as an exchange of value, because the reality is we're headed towards a tokenized kind of economy where most things in a way will interact, whether business or not, will be through digital means of payments and stores of value. And these cryptocurrencies, as long as one person uses them, they still have some kind of relevance and value. So as long as one person is willing to use a Bitcoin, it still will continue to exist and we'll still continue to use them alongside digital dollars when they'll come around very soon. So,
Andy Baker, I don't know if you got the question, the CIO, Barclays Africa, head of infrastructure. I just asked, do you think there's a future for decentralized cryptocurrencies, as opposed to central bank coins?
So that was in. Can you hear me? Is it? Yep. Is it dead? Is it? Can you hear me in the audience? There you go. So quite interesting. I was either going to go with I agree completely, or try sort of a zero knowledge answer to a question. From a cryptocurrency perspective, I'm indifferent a little bit to which way they go and what their future is. The technology really excites me, but as a store of value, I've been in crypto for about 2 years, and I moved out in December. I spent my whole time on my phone just checking my prices, and I was on holiday on a beach fishing, and my friend came up to me and said, "Do you know what fishing is?" And I'm like, "Yep." So I made a call. That volatility, I think, is driving a lot of people out of the market. I think people came in at the end. Some of them are in because they've taken a loss, and I don't think we know why we're there. We just felt we had to go and buy some and watch it go up. But if you're in investment for a long time, you know there's never a happy ending with that kind of rationale. And from a payments perspective, there were a couple of companies or corporates in South Africa that started to introduce it. They kind of fell away from it. So I think we're all excited about the technology from Barclays Africa perspective. Cryptocurrencies, I'm over it a little bit. But I think the technology, things like Byzantine fault tolerance, consensus protocols, they're fascinating. They have a massive impact on the way that banks talk to each other, potentially.
Okay, so just a last question on that point then. Do any of you have a favorite decentralized cryptocurrency that you are bullish on, or?
Time for a pump, Monero.
So,
Big fan of Monero.
So I work for a bank. I can't give that advice.
That's good advice, isn't it?
It's a bit of a cop out. But I'm not in now. I got out in December.
So only one person is bullish on any sort of cryptocurrency, other than
Unsurprisingly,
decentralized.
Pretty long on XRP.
Okay, so
We'll second your XRP. We'll say XRP.
Long on lumens, what did you say? Sorry.
Yes. Okay, I would like to talk more about the currency aspect, and we'll get onto the blockchain thing. Now, Ripple, Ripple's taken a lot of flack, I guess, from the crypto community. They keep on talking about how Ripple is not a cryptocurrency, and at the very least, it's not decentralized. Now, I'm just interested, Adrian, in your experience. I mean, obviously, you're not trying to appeal to a mass market, although XRPs are traded on exchanges. I mean, ultimately, the XRP is meant to be a settlement coin between banks. Is that sort of the ultimate goal of XRP?
It's meant to be a neutral asset. So it's meant to be a neutral asset that can be used for very efficient payment across borders, so between any two other assets. So if you look at the original design of the XRP ledger, you could actually issue those other assets onto the ledger. You can still do that today, but most of our customers are not interested in that feature. They're interested in purely the asset itself. And the use case is, if I want to, the solution is a liquidity solution more than anything. If I'm a bank in the US, let's say, and I have very occasional payments I need to make to South Africa, I either have to hold a bank account with rands in it, it's float, that I use to make those payments, or I have to, on demand, go out and buy rands, which takes days. So I end up with this compromise between, do I execute this payment quickly, using, where I've got a high capital cost because I've got float, or do I execute the payment slowly by going out and buying rands? What we're proposing with XRP as a digital asset, which is frictionless and moves very quickly, is buy XRP, send the XRP to South Africa and sell it in South Africa, and you complete all three of those transactions within a few seconds. So that's the value proposition. Is it's a neutral asset. You buy and sell in one transaction as a way of doing cross-border payment.
So I just finally on Ripple, what is the investment thesis behind Ripple? Do you think I should invest in it as a store of value asset that can appreciate?
Well, I'm not sure if you'll be able to invest in Ripple because we're a private company.
I mean XRP. Should I buy and sell XRP? Should I buy XRP? I'm
not sure if I should be giving an investment advice. There's a guy over here who teaches how to trade in crypto. Maybe a good person to ask. But you've got to decide. I think Stefan made this point talking about ICOs earlier. If you're looking at any token, what is the intrinsic value? And I think today there's a huge amount of speculative value in the market across all currencies. People are putting a value on tokens based on what they think the future use case of that token is, and I guess you need to look at the business case, look at the value proposition Ripple has for XRP or anybody else who's building on the XRP ledger, and decide, do I see a future usefulness in this token?
Sure.
Make your own call.
I'd love to hear, Andy, I mean, you're a bank, and you're the target market for Ripple. What do you think of Ripple?
So we wouldn't use it at this point in time, and there's a couple of reasons around that. One of them is, would I hold such a volatile asset as a company? So I'm a dollar-based company or a rand-based company. Would I? If you look at Ripple's price over the last 3 months, right? So would I hold that as a result? That is an issue. The volatility of the asset is an issue, and also, you're creating a polygon. So in the world that I live right now, I trade a spread. I trade a dollar-rand instrument. There's two legs to it. You're adding a third leg. So every time you take liquidity from one source to another, there's a bid-offer spread in there. So you're gonna take a rand Ripple spread, then a dollar Ripple spread as well, and your holding asset. The other thing we look at is who holds the bulk of that XRP currency. So if it was held by millions of people, the distribution of that currency was, widespread, then we'd say, okay, the volatility is likely to be less because there'll be active participants. I don't see that in Ripple right now. I see a concentration of ownership, which for a bank is a turn-off.
If I may respond to that very quickly. So I think there's a misconception around holding XRP. The expectation for anyone who is using XRP for payments is not that they would hold XRP, it's that they would buy it on demand. And that's how our customers are using it today. So if you look at Qualix, for example, who were the first customer to use XRP in this way, they're buying XRP on Bitstamp for dollars. They hold dollars. They're a US company. They need to be able to send money to Mexico and deliver pesos. So they buy XRP on demand, they send that XRP to Bitso. Bitso sells the XRP, they sell the XRP at Bitso, and they send out pesos. So it's and the reason for doing multiple bit ask, as Andy says, is it's impossible to find another asset that you can move across the border from the US to Mexico as frictionlessly as you can with a counterpartyless asset. So, you can do it with any counterpartyless asset. Pairs are doing it with Bitcoin today. That is their business. The challenge with Bitcoin is that there's some delays in making the actual payment. So if you want to do a payment like I just described from the US to Mexico, it's going to take roughly an hour, and then you are more subject to volatility. If the payment completes end-to-end in a few seconds, volatility is not really an issue.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on. I know that blockchain is touted to allow businesses to operate more efficiently or with more transparency, or to be able to share information more seamlessly without having to have all these different ledgers and databases that need to be reconciled. But Marvin, I'd like to know from you, because I think you're involved in this space, what socio-economic applications or benefits are there to cryptocurrency or tokens or blockchain that you have been involved with?
A few. The most recent one is tokenized security. So tokenized security, I'm sure people know, is the idea of creating a digital representation of a financial instrument. The idea of being able to transfer a financial instrument around the world instantly, cheaply, securely, you know who owns it the next time, etc. My background is as a venture technology lawyer, so I drafted a lot of these deals and created paper-based share certificates. So the idea of being able to create a liquid financial instrument that anybody can buy at any point and have access to these kind of financial markets is a huge value proposition for countries where there hasn't been capital markets infrastructure. The opportunity for companies to raise capital globally, instantly and securely, as well as for people to participate in those rounds and in those investments. So one of the things we're working on the most right now is a digital asset backed by real world social impact. So that means you create a certain amount of solar energy or clean water production. We're trying to tie that to the value of an actual digital asset. And the goal beyond that is to create a market for these digital assets where anybody can buy them around the world and companies can raise capital. So if you're a South African company, for example, it's probably extremely difficult to list on the local stock exchange, whereas with these kind of platforms for tokenized securities, you can list with certain requirements, but not a requirement to be of a certain amount of value of a company to have access to capital globally. Just the idea of being able to sell your company and have people participate in it through a digital platform is a huge value proposition for emerging markets. People can raise capital for the first time. That's the most current thing we're involved in.
Okay, thank you very much. And John, I know that PwC has the Vulcan platform, which is a digital asset trading platform. What kind of assets are you thinking of trading on that?
Yeah, so not so much a trading platform. We've been working for a few years with a lot of central banks and other major banks in tokenizing fiat currency mainly, and working on the basis from a social angle. We've been working with governments that are making payments using tokenized cash from peer-to-peer wallets, and allowing us to, when we have tokenized cash, we have money with context, programmable cash, and we can trace all the movement of that money that the government is making in terms of investment to various parties. So in corrupt locations where, let's just say, some people are being paid for things that they shouldn't be paid for, the governments are very happy that the $100 million that they put into said project has been allocated to different owners in very clear and precise manners. There's no leakage, there's no fraud, and clearly when we're making global payments or global foundation-related payments to countries in need, we don't want 20% of that money to go missing when it gets to the other side. So we're using that a lot for social-related foundation-based payments.
Okay, now Michael, I think in your session, we saw how many different tools and different platforms and all sorts of things that Azure supports. I think that for the last few years, in fact, people have been POCing, busy trialing use cases and just about any kind of use case you can imagine is being put into a blockchain, or blockchain is being forced into it. But what are the most promising applications of blockchain that are you seeing on those platforms where it looks like it's no longer POC, there's real production value here, it's been rolled out, and it was something that was never possible before without blockchain?
Yeah, I think in particular things like specialty insurance, especially reinsurance markets, where you have this complex problem of contract versioning plus real-time market data that could impact the price of risk. So when you think about, you know, a very large-scale asset like aviation, container shipping, commercial real estate, you know, these things are very much subject to kind of real-time forces that could then reprice the risk. And if you've got a convoluted network of reinsurers that have all taken a piece of that risk, there's a mad scramble to then try and get up-to-date information. And so having a ledger, having a distributed ledger act as that marketplace for the arbitrage of both the insurance contracts as well as the real-time state information of the health of the asset could really go a long way to return capital and avoid those asset owners paying exorbitant premiums. Because right now, a lot of times you default to the highest risk or the last best known risk, so you have to overprice the premium, and it's bad for commerce, it's bad for business. The other one, which I'm really excited about, especially on the African continent in working with corporate Africa, is getting to know all the different paper-based instruments, so things like bank guarantees, performance bonds, all these things today that really prohibit the interaction between small, medium enterprises, larger corporates, and especially Pan-African trade. You know, if you can start to really digitize these types of instruments and workflows so that there's real-time state availability between endorsing banks, issuing banks, corporates, small, medium enterprises, and you make it pragmatic for everybody, where, you know, the guy on the street, you know, with the bags of cement, he's got his mobile app. That's all. He doesn't even care about a blockchain. He just knows he's filling his orders on the mobile app. Meanwhile, the bank back office and the corporate back office and the corporate procurement, you know, they've got a distributed ledger view. They can agree, and taking that forward, you can almost then see a credit worthiness or a credit rating for that small supplier. So now let's help him finance the project, give him some more capital so that he could actually grow his business.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask a question for all of you, and then I'll open it up to the audience. You know, I think blockchain is almost passé now. You know, I think if you're a blockchain company, you're kind of boring. If you're an ICO company, however, it seems that, I don't know if that's cooled down, but obviously over the last year, especially 2017, we saw companies raising huge amounts of money on their ICOs. Do you see this as, and I don't really want to get into the regulation, I think tomorrow there'll be a regulatory panel, but do you think that this whole idea of being able to raise money either through selling utility tokens or not necessarily issuing securities, because obviously there's a regulatory aspect to that, but do you think ICOs, I mean, are there any ICOs that you see real value in or potential value? Or do you think that this is another one of those hype bubbles that will eventually blow over through either regulatory pressure or the fact that you know, these organizations aren't accountable when they start selling and raising money through ICOs? I guess, Adrian, we can start with you and then move on.
Sure, so I think it's very useful to distinguish between tokens that are native to the blockchain on which they exist and tokens that are issued by an issuer, because they're very different things. And I think the business case and the uses of those tokens are very different, because when you are using a token that's native to that blockchain, the security of the token comes down to the technology of the blockchain and the size of the network and so on. So that the network effect behind these big public blockchains is why you know, there's value in that token. Whereas if somebody issues an ERC20 token on Ethereum, you've got to look at that contract and decide, you know, what are the issuance rules around issuing new tokens and so on. But ultimately, there's an issuer, and I think it's important to distinguish between those two things. So I think the issued token use case is completely different to the counterpartyless token use case. And in the issued token world, like, there are definitely endless scams that have sort of, we're at the peak of the ICO scam bubble, if you like, or hype cycle, and I'm hoping that we're at the peak and it's kind of dying away. But I do think it's a really interesting new way to think about digitizing assets and making them tradable in a more frictionless fashion and raising money differently. But I think it's important to consider that completely separately to things like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and XRP in terms of what you would actually use them for and the problems that they solve.
Yeah, tokenize everything, that's what I say, right? So ICOs are a part of that world. Look at the Goldman's boys and their Poloniex you know, acquisition. they absolutely see that the next generation of managed funds are going to be made up of token-based businesses. Better be making those securities on an SEC regulated scale and get them on those sort of exchanges, and better be creating funds and structures and derivatives associated with those businesses. So, you know, utility token versus security token, you know, we talk about that for hours. At the end of the day, the ICO market's here to stay, thank God, and the new markets are going to be moving at a massive rate. So watch the Goldmans, boys. I think, you know, that was a big move on their behalf, and I'm a big fan. They're going to keep on going.
Yeah, I think ultimately you got to track back to something of value in the real world. So the idea of tokenization, I think, really makes sense. Like, I really like the land example that we saw earlier today, where you take a parcel of land, carve that up into tokens. Now I've got some traceability between the digital world and the real world. I think where it gets a little dodgy is some of these token concepts out there where it's very difficult to walk back the token to actually find the point of value, you know, in the physical world, the actual tangible good or service that I'm actually getting out of it. Otherwise, then it does feel like some kind of security or instrument, and it feels like, well, you're kind of trying to have the best of both worlds.
I have a lot of thoughts about this. I'll try and narrow it down. But the idea of being able to issue a token, create a community, and raise funds to build a project is a beautiful thing. Problem in the space, though, right now we're at a peak where people have raised a lot of money, more money than they'll ever need to build any project or product, to build things that they haven't found a product market fit for, which is fine. You don't need $50 million to find a product market fit. And I think what's going to happen in the next year or so is some of these companies are going to start to launch their products for the first time. We'll realize that a lot of those products won't be as great as they were marketed to be. And I think a lot of people lose confidence. I think when people talk about the bubble, that's what that is. When people release actual products that are meant to create a value in the real world, and they won't as much, and people will lose confidence in these products. Their prices will drop. A lot of companies that have been listed on public exchanges will also drop because of this. So that's the bubble I think we kind of mentioned. But you know, the idea, like you mentioned, of tokenizing all things is a reality. That's where we are, right? And everything has growing pains. We're just going through growing pains of having a very unregulated market of raising funds with no diligence behind it. When you raise venture funds, you go through a rigorous diligence process. And there's pros and cons to that. You have to go to a select group of people who control basically your life, the future of your business, but they go through diligence projects to see if you actually have a product that has a potential. This is different. The more you market digitally, successfully, the more money you raise. Realistically, that's what it comes down to. So we headed for a world where you can release and build a community to raise funds for projects. That'll probably, hopefully, be a little more regulated, a little less wild as it is now. But right now, it's just growing pains. That's just any industry goes through these kind of things. So it's not something to be scared of at all.
So actually, can I ask a favor? I'm a bank, so ICOs is not something that we would run a narrative of, but you did mention before about socio-economic impact. Would you mind if I dip into that? Because there's one thing that we haven't discussed yet that really excites me, especially from an African perspective. One of the biggest barriers I see to anything in Africa is identity. So, you know, you've got tens of millions of people in South Africa that don't own bank accounts. The FICA process costs most banks many thousands of rand, and so that barrier to giving away those services or including those people or offering loans to them fails right at the start because you don't know who you're dealing with. So the thing that excites me the most would be having using something like Sovereign or UPOR or many of the protocols like that to identify somebody and to validate that really gives me a buzz because you've got two worlds here. You've got the new world of distributed everything, and great, that's a revolution, and maybe that takes off. But you've also got the world that I live in, and we would also like to include people that are there today. And the biggest barrier is who am I dealing with? So we're in final stages of. It's not a pipe dream either. Have a final stage demo next week. It's very mature, and that's something that we're discussing widely with the banking community and regulation community, saying this is huge. This isn't something that you need 2 years worth of deep. The process as it stands today is horrific. So this change is net positive in any direction. So that's something I'm very passionate about.
Great. I do want to come back to you, Andy, as a bank. I have a question, but I think let me give a chance to the floor in case there is somebody who wants to ask a question. Is there? Can I keep going?
Right.
Yeah?
Hi everyone, my name is Carl. I've got a couple of questions for John actually. It's a multi-part question. So firstly, you mentioned tokenizing fiat. So there's been a very successful deployment of POC done in Singapore, and it's recently been made public that the South African Reserve Bank will be doing a similar project. Are you currently working on this? And what other projects or similar have you worked on before?
Yeah, so
project involvement, if you could just expand on that a little bit, please. Thanks.
So we worked with Maz for quite some time. Well, I think most of us in the room are aware of Project Hugin and where that's come from and where it's going to. We, yes, are working with the South African Reserve Bank on various different levels. And we probably have 5 or 6 other major exchanges, central banks that we're working with today on the digitization and tokenization of cash. It's a really, really interesting topic. Bank of England has done a few good papers on it. We can talk about that for hours, I'm sure, as well. But at the end of the day, there's big implications for banks, for commercial banks, for the economy more broadly, and how the reserve banks protect and govern such new digital cryptocurrencies, particularly ones that they mint themselves. Only today we had a good hour with the bank, and there's a lot of concern about what will happen on a social and on an economic level when this changes. So yeah, look, Vulcan is a platform we've been building in open source technologies for a couple of years now, and we use that to digitize cash, tokenize cash today in many currencies around the world, and continues to be used for central bank purposes.
Can I ask a question? Sure. So, kind of following on from what we discussed, I'm interested to hear from the rest of the guys, and I have an idea myself. When you digitize things, so you create a token that represents something out there, ultimately there's somebody who's the issuer of that token and responsible for redeeming it. What about the use case, or what about the token itself or the asset makes blockchain the applicable platform to issue the token on? Like, when is it appropriate for this token to exist on a decentralized platform? And when is it okay for it just to be a digital representation of a title deed in a system that's run by the government who ultimately is going to enforce the title deed?
Well, I think it's the combination of the crypto plus the distributed network property that make the issuance particularly compelling, right? So the fact that at issuance you're going to have this public-private key pair associated with the token, you're presumably going to have key management, although I would contend I think the cybersecurity standards in this space are far too mature, and that's, I think, the biggest risk there of all, especially if you've got central banks getting into issuance of currency on a blockchain. But that, and then that idea that then the participants in this token presumably have the copy of the same ledger, I think those two things, if done properly, make blockchain a compelling scenario for the tokenization.
I think a lot of people are jumping to tokenizing everything, which is fine. They totally want to tokenize everything, but I think a lot of people are skipping to that use case and assuming that it solves a problem. It doesn't always solve a problem to tokenize something. There's a lot of things we can do with this technology and other technologies now that work now, low-hanging fruit. You start there and you build a base on top of it. I'm a big data from the outside world. Internet of Things, oracles, that kind of stuff. The biggest impediment to the space now, all the things that you mentioned, not possible without oracles. We don't have any solid oracle systems to depend on, right? So if you wanted to build an insurance product for an agricultural farm to measure rainfall, you can't do that right now. That's almost impossible to do. So it's people to skip into that step, and for our business for a while we did skip to that step, and we've kind of pulled back to build basic infrastructure, like we mentioned, because that's things that we can do now. And that is hard enough to do, that adding tokens and figuring out crypto economics and how people will behave in the digital economy is 10 times more difficult and a very difficult thing to deal with.
So I'm kind of closest to what you're saying. A lot of the times when I look at solutions for things that have been tokenized, it feels like they've missed the point as far as I can see. The process of tokenization allows you to completely change a process. If you miss that step and you just move something onto it, I'm assuming we're using blockchain and DLT interchangeably, because I can't stand blockchain. So any distributed ledger technology, there's a few out there that I really, really like. And then it comes down to what trust cases do you want. Do you want something that's public and open where everyone can see it? Then there's fear around unmasking of that data. So sitting where I sit right now, we quite like a private space. So for us, we would look at a technology like Quorum and say, we can create an interbank network for stripping away reams of processes. I actually spent this morning speaking to Sean, just trying to get my head, I understand how RTGS would work on a distributed ledger. I actually don't know how it works today on the existing system, because it's such a thing. And I said, so you know, what is it different to this? Is it just like I call somebody and he went through it in detail with me, and I was like, okay, that's messed up, you know. So for me, the biggest part is actually saying, why do we do all this weird stuff right now? And let's strip it away. And by the way, what technology could you use to move into that space? You could use a public cloud. There's loads of different ways of tackling it. So the fixation on tokenizing everything, I'm not really in that space, massively transforming processes, that excites me.
I think scale is a major conversation. We haven't really talked about that. I think we all know that there's major issues with consensus algorithms on different levels. Very interested in next sort of cyclical graph-based mathematics like Hashgraph and the Swirls guys. I think there's a long way to go for the technology to provide that level of scale that we're talking about. Certainly in Bank of England papers, they talk a lot about scale being an issue. So look, at the end of the day, I think there's some technology to go a long way as well.
So just to jump in on that, so if you're doing some kind of like proof of work, you're going to choke. So if you look at what Quorum did, they do a practical Byzantine fault tolerance. They have a voting system on it. We got through in our test 300-400 transactions a second with minimal hardware behind it. So, but if you go into the public dynamic membership, anyone can join. Then you're going to crunch 7 transactions a second, 5 transactions a second, and spend your whole life working out what data you put in there, and what data you move out, and or how big your blocks are. So for me, the technologies have matured. Quorum gives us scale, and I think JP Morgan, when they picked it up from Ethereum, their first view was Ethereum solves a lot of the problems, but we as a bank want to put our edge on it, and they've kind of got to where we are.
Yeah, big difference between public versus private management of these platforms.
Right. Can I get one thing about what I said earlier? Decentralized applications and the idea of having a community built around a thing represents the digitization of human behavior. It's not going to be the case that we're going to act in a digital economy the same way that we act in a non-digital economy. And the only way we'll get to those platforms is if we build platforms that don't use tokens in the meantime to build data, actual quantifiable data of how these platforms will actually exist in the future. So I just want to be clear on that. I don't want to bash it. The apps are the future of the world.
Sure. So I'm very pleased with the way the discussion has gone, because this is exactly where I wanted to go before we left off. This whole idea, if we think about what blockchain, the idea was, I think the one word is decentralization, if you were to sum it all up. Now, you know, when we talk about consortia or groups of people coming together, banks and so on, what we're essentially doing is we're creating an environment that's not decentralized. I mean, there is an agreement that everybody has bonded together with, and so what has been puzzling me over the last few years while I've been involved with blockchain is this sort of conundrum between private and and permissionless or permission and permissionless blockchains. To me, when I think about a blockchain, the whole point around a blockchain was so you could have a permissionless environment. And as soon as you have a permissioned environment, what you've essentially done is you've removed the single most defining principle about what makes a blockchain. And I think this was most visibly represented when we saw how R3 pursued the blockchain idea and then produced Corda, which was distinctly not a blockchain. And so, like, when we talk about blockchain nowadays, is it possible that we can just, like you said, you hate the word blockchain,
yeah.
And I think I get that, because what we have done now is we're misusing the term, where we're now essentially talking distributed ledger technology. So this whole dream of having permissioned blockchains, is that what's the word when something doesn't make sense when you put two words together? Oxymoron.
I totally disagree. No, I totally disagree, because it's like saying you can't have HTTP on an intranet, right? It's just a protocol. So regardless of whether you have, for us, it's more about the multi-party computation. Because if you have multiple counterparties that are able to get rid of reconciliation, get rid of batch processing, and whether you want to call it a distributed database, a distributed ledger, blockchain, whatever, regardless, the fundamental remains that today you have multiple organizations that have to process things in silos, and they can't collaborate, either because they're afraid of the public cloud, or they're afraid of network connections, or they're afraid of the overhead they're going to put on their network admin teams. But just let the protocols do their things, and then call it what you want. You know, Rose by any other name.
Yeah, I think there's a lot attached to the naming. It's the same as mobile. You know, are you doing mobile? Are you doing big data?
Yeah.
It's a buzzword, and I think it comes from whether you consider something blockchain or not has a lot to do with what your goals are for the technology. Are you trying to create a revolution, or are you trying to create an evolution? You know, so I think for a lot of people, they hopped onto the blockchain revolution and they said, well, actually, we can evolve what we've got today with some of these ideas, and that's what we have. So, you know, I think the original block Bitcoiners and the maximalists are going, you know, you guys have co-opted our technology to basically evolve the systems that we don't like, and the things that you do that we don't like. But, you know, that's evolution.
There's a question over here.
So that when I hired a really good crypto developer about 2 or 3 years ago. He's involved in some of the work here, and we had this conversation. He said, "Look, I don't want to do bank blockchain or bank DLT. I want to do the other stuff." And the conversation I have with him, it comes down to this: the most amazing thing about blockchain, even though it's batch based, is the fact that it's censorship resistant. That was the fascination of it. To create something, remember it was around the time of the financial crisis, to create something that no one can mess with, right? So I said, I'm a bank. I'm not there. That's the other world. So the differentiation is that I am censored, right? So censorship resistant is not particularly useful for me. And having a proof of work when it's me and 3 other banks on a network is not particularly useful. And then he came back with a very annoying comment, which was kind of where your question was. He said, well, if that's the case, why do you need any consensus protocol? Surely you trust each other anyway. And I was like, can't you just put a SQL database in and I'm done with it? And that's an annoying question.
And that was kind of where I was going with my question earlier. It's like, often there's a use case where even if you're digitizing a process, you don't need a blockchain. You don't need a distributed system. I think we hop, as the point was made earlier, we hop straight to, wait, there's this new distributed ledger technology, let's see if we can use that. And often you actually don't need it.
Yes, because I mean, for the vast majority of use cases, it's true. Why not use a SQL database if everyone is agreeing? It's quicker and cheaper, and the tech exists.
It's not as much fun.
It's not as much fun. You don't get funded or don't raise any ideas. But anyway, there was a question. There's many questions. Go for it.
Just how much do you think the fact that the miners are burning so much energy and the environmental issue, how much do you think that is going to damage Bitcoin's cause and survival in the long run, and do you see any solution for it?
I would love to answer that.
You want to go?
Yeah,
go for it.
So, yes, I remember the days when that bugged me. I also because it was always about how much energy is being burnt, and of course, we don't like to consume resources if it's not necessary to do so. So when you think about consensus, in these decentralized environments, one of the things though we're forgetting when people talk about how much energy blockchain uses is that we're not getting a chance to compare it in relation to how much energy a data center burns. I mean, Microsoft, you guys are pretty huge data centers, and the amount of energy gets consumed in a data center is enormous. If you think about all the energy that is consumed in for the internet itself, I mean, the internet consists of ISPs with massive data centers and so on. So I think it's unfair just to say, look, Bitcoin proof of work burns so much energy. It really is performing a very good function, and I do prefer it to over proof of stake, because proof of work requires you to be constantly competitive. You know, what you have to do is you have to constantly innovate and to be able to create technology that is efficient. You have to burn real-world resources and compete with people. I think I'm against proof of stake, even though proof of stake is energy efficient, because what it allows people to do is become rentiers, if you like. You know, if you have a large amount of capital, you can just sit and accumulate more. You know, you don't have to worry about innovating or improving the processes and be competitive with anybody. You just got to make sure that you can accumulate the most capital, and then you will be able to, you know, constantly grow your pool. So I think that, you know, that technology, all technology consumes energy. We don't worry about how much energy Google is burning, but Google is an extremely useful resource, and I think that the energy required to run Bitcoin isn't that energy inefficient. It just seems a lot when we say it, but it's the same as Ireland or whatever it is. I think it's a great way to achieve decentralized consensus.
Yeah, I would agree predominantly with that. The amount of energy used to maintain Bitcoin is a part of the market forces at play there. Like, how valuable is the service that burning that energy provides to the Bitcoin network? And if it's valuable enough, people will continue to spend the money on the electricity to mine, and that's reflected in the price of Bitcoin, because they're earning enough from mining to make it worth their while. So I think as long as Bitcoin continues to be useful to people, mining will continue to be important.
I'm in the opposite end of the spectrum on that. I think it might well be its ultimate downfall. When you compare it, you can't compare it with Google. You've got to compare it with something like Visa. 40,000 transactions a second. Okay, this does 7. Okay, so it's like the world's most expensive way to move hardly anything around.
That's Bitcoin Core you're talking about, not Bitcoin Cash.
So I think it's a really sucky way to secure something, and more than that, what fascinates me is the next halving. So all the halvings that we've had so far have been preceded by quite a large growth in the cost of the cryptocurrency, which means that all your custom ASICs that are sat there depreciating a certain amount, using a certain amount of electricity, they've managed to stay online. You've got this perfect couple of factors that if you don't get that growth in the value of the currency and you get a halving as well, then you're going to lose a percentage of your mining community after a halving. And more fun than that for me is that difficulty target only changes every 2 weeks. Right, so if you have a quick wind down in the mining community after a halving, you're wide open. You have a massive problem there. So I think that it could be quite an Achilles heel.
I agree with you, but the value of it to the network is currently reflected in the price of Bitcoin. So you may be right that mining becomes more and more of a problem, and what we will see then is the price of Bitcoin will just go to nothing.
That's my guess.
So there was another question, I think you might. Okay, go for it. Your hand is up.
My question is to the gentleman from Microsoft. I followed the debate on social media, and it was instigated by a very prominent Bitcoin engineer. And they were basically appreciating the ingenuity behind the security of the Bitcoin system, vis-a-vis platforms like Ethereum and other. I mean, Ethereum and other Windows into Ethereum and and they particularly cited Microsoft as a very unsecure platform for the simple reason that your engineering is not the same as Bitcoin. It's not open source, so you don't get people picking on your software, picking parts and stuff like that. So now that you're building the platform you're building, and you still have that as an inherent weakness, and there's an intention that you're going to develop an app running and moving value around this platform, how do you plan to deal with that? So long as your mechanism is centralized and it's not open source, it's easy to hack a Microsoft platform. It's very difficult to hack a Bitcoin platform. So how do you plan to deal with that?
So if you recall on the logo, none of the logos that I showed on the slide were Microsoft logos. They were all open source technologies. So this is all open source hosted on Azure, right? So this is whether it's Linux VMs or Ethereum nodes or Corda, Hyperledger Fabric, doesn't matter. So it is all open source. Now, with respect to the Microsoft platform, if you want to talk about security there, I'll bring my 70 plus security certifications. I'll bring my auditors that have 24/7, 365 access to my data centers. I'll bring the fact that we sign up, we give banks right to audit of Azure, so any of our global banking customers can actually come in, audit our data center anytime. I'll bring my digital cyber unit with like 3,000 incident response engineers. I mean, we could talk security of the platform all day long, but it's not the fact that we are not requiring customers to run Windows in any of the Azure workloads or any of the blockchain workloads. It's all open source, it's all your tech, it's all your subscription. You lock it down, you secure it with the work that we bring to secure the general platform.
So I just want to put something in there. I think the general point around security is quite fascinating. So we started playing around with Ethereum a couple of years ago, and I wrote a contract that I thought was unhackable. The guys in Prague took it out in about 2 or 3 hours. So it looks, it looks a bit like Java. You know, you're programming a language that I'm very familiar with. What I didn't realize, and I tweeted it as well, and everyone was looking at the code that they hacked, that the names in a class, if you call nested functions, they essentially overwrite each other. Now that's a very weird feature for that. For anyone writing crypto contracts, they'd be flawed. You know, on my tweet, you can see the little tweet where I call a test case and it fails, and it should be an uninitialized variable. And we were looking at that for ages saying, what the heck is this? And then you've got to put a keyword of memory in front of a private variable. So to your point, to a wider point, one of the things that scares me, not necessarily your platform, your operating system, there's a number of issues here. The exchange, going onto the exchange, moving from fiat onto crypto, big weakness there. It's been blowing up all the time. Me writing a contract, thinking I can replace a lawyer with a block of code, and actually I get a couple of my guys to look at it and they rip it to pieces. So I have real concerns around the scaling of the system and the automation of it. And that's why I quite like starting somewhere simple. Start on identity. Start something that's really broken right now and then it's very easy to secure.
I think, if you don't mind, I think we have to remember that this is the beginning of blockchain technology. So to expect that it'll have the security without the resources that you have available to you is unrealistic, right? Like we're at the very start of it. The idea of having Solidity language that's not as secure needs to go through like a $500,000 security audit process is expected. That's just where we are, right? Sure. But in the next couple of years, it'll have to become more secure. You'll have computers become significantly more powerful with quantum computing. You'll have to have more resources dedicated to it. The fact that it's open source means that people are going to dedicate resources themselves to do it, as opposed to having to dedicate resources to a centralized body to do it. So the idea of having, my friend, a Bitcoin or Ethereum blockchain, whichever one, this level of security that it has, given the infancy of the technology and the lack of resources that it has, is incredible. Hopefully we'll get there one day, where it's ultimately secure or easier to write these languages and secure them in a way. So it's just a start. We'll get there, hopefully. We have to. Put too many assets on it.
Okay, so I think let's wrap up with one last question. Do you want to ask your question, and then we're going to have to wrap it up? Which one of you guys?
So I'm a research scientist by training.
I'm a research scientist by training, and what we're finding is that there's sort of a fundamental problem when it comes to the way that we quantify what works and what doesn't, and then communicate that to the wider community. Can you all talk a little bit more about what you all are trying to do to better sort of propagate your findings and validate your assumptions?
So sure, from the Ripple side, you'll find that the XRP ledger code obviously is open source, so available for peer review, as well as a number of academic papers that have actually been published with mathematical proofs around our consensus algorithm. There's one that was published a couple of weeks ago, which is actually a proposed new consensus algorithm. So we're investing a lot of time and energy in doing the hard yards in that respect, so actual mathematical proofs around how the stuff works, putting it out there, publishing it for academic peer review, getting feedback. So the original Ripple consensus paper is a few years old now. There was another one published as an update based on that, and you know, fixes going into the code. So that's quite an important part of the process, I think. So I'm involved in our research team where we're doing work on Interledger. That started with a white paper that wasn't what most people think of as a white paper now in the ICO craze, a business idea and a request for money. It was actually maths. It was lots and lots of maths describing how Interledger achieved its goals and an attempt to mathematically prove that it could do that. So I think there is a need to come back to that in some respects and appreciate what a white paper is supposed to be and what papers like that are supposed to be. And I think organizations like Hyperledger and so on are really good for the community in that respect as well, because they're going through a lot of due diligence stuff and doing the hard yards and establishing standards and saying, here's a consensus algorithm. We're putting researchers behind just proving this algorithm, not just writing code to get it out there and see how much money we can make. Actually doing the academic work.
I think the white paper comment is a great comment, right? At the end of the day, white papers, when we used to write them in the old days, they're very technical, right? And they have mathematics involved in them. But having said that, white papers that are issued today for ICOs, generally speaking, give you a hell of a lot of information on what they're doing, right? And there are thousands of these things out there today. So, thinking a little bit laterally around some of this information and understanding where the market is going and evolving, one of the best things to do is just go read all the white papers. There's a lot of information.
Right, so those are pre-things, right? What we need is to be able to quantify the use case, what the value proposition is, and understanding what is the true impact of it, which is something that we really don't often see.
Yeah, good luck with that.
No, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think what you're getting at is that people don't spend enough time talking to the people that are actually supposed to be using these products. And that's part of the reason. People can't quantify the impact they're having because they spend a lot of time thinking about the code and the white paper and the research, which is valuable, and we're doing the same thing, but we spend a lot of time talking to customers and realize we've stripped our product like 4 different times because we realized the thing we were building people wouldn't actually use. It wasn't necessary. So we had to build it down to something very simple because that was the only thing people would use. And if they're not going to use it, it's not going to have an impact. Why are we building it? Why are we spending resources on it and time on it?
So we're in an interesting space because generally speaking, if something happens in the banking community, the first email you get is your NDA. So you're like, oh, okay, and you kind of understand that. You actually understand that there's a lot of sensitivity around this. So I sit here today really excited about some of the stuff that I'm working on, but the stuff that I can talk about is also very, very exciting. It does frustrate me a little bit to what is the right balance of peppering things with NDA and actually saying to the community, hey, we're all looking at this, we're really excited about this, here's what we found, here's what we think the value of it, here's what we think it will do, but that's not the community, that's a big shift. So what happened in South Africa is all the banks got together, they created a free for entry forum where we could sit and share proof of concepts and R&D that we had. That's powerful. That's actually powerful. We stop the overlaps because me doing a distributed ledger for my bank, it's not that useful, it's just me, right? So who am I distributing with? And you see that a lot. A lot of banks getting very excited about, we've got a distributed ledger. You say, what are you doing with that? My staff can send each other messages like WhatsApp, So I think the two parts are like socialize what you're working on. A lot of this isn't out there, and you don't actually know what it's going to do when it goes out there. So it's more R&D than like defined benefits. And the next thing is the white papers. We published our first white paper on zero knowledge proof. Really, really interesting read. Bit weird, for someone with a regular coding background, but very enjoyable. And so you can figure out what you can do with that, I guess.
Okay, Andy, Marvin, Michael, John, Adrian, thank you very much for your time and your insight, and I really appreciate it. I'm sure we all got a lot out of that. Thank you very much.
Yes, I know there was a super long one, guys, but we're back at the apartment. It's been a hectic day, so much knowledge to be taking in. We're trying to wrap up these edits, getting ready to upload. But in a nutshell, that was the importance of cryptocurrencies and blockchain in a global sense. Yeah, the world is changing. If you haven't yet, this is the best time to start earning Steam. So head over to Steam, open up your blog if you haven't yet. Start writing about what your passion is. You can earn cryptocurrencies for free, so you don't have to put your money in there. So you've got much less to lose. Yeah, day one was amazing. My mind was so blown, super tired. I'm gonna sleep like a baby. And yeah, what else is there to say? Guys, it's been fun. I hope this has inspired you, maybe if you didn't understand it, to look into this a little bit more. I've got a notebook that I have scratched to pieces, which I will work on next week. I will be bringing smaller videos once again. But yeah, I'm looking forward to tomorrow. Guys, if you want to see a second point of view, head over to Nick's channel. That's his face just there. And if you haven't yet, feel free to subscribe to his channel, subscribe to my channel. If you have already subscribed, don't touch that subscribe button, but hit that notification bell down there to stay up to date with the latest. Peace.